In the name of God, in whom we live and move and have our being. Amen. A few years ago, I attended a diocesan conference in Massachusetts. It was led by a lady named Phyllis Tickle. I just love her name. I love that name, Phyllis Tickle. And I had fun referring to it as the Tickle event. As in, are you going to the Tickle event at the cathedral next week? So fun. Phyllis Tickle went home to God a few years ago. And even though her name sounded like it could have belonged to an exotic dancer, she was actually a very dignified, spiritually perceptive, and intellectually brilliant woman. Certainly a person to be reckoned with. She was a wise, wonderful, and courageous lay leader in our church. She was also a noted author and has many excellent publications, most of which deal with subjects of spirituality and prayer. I enjoy having many of them on my bookshelves. She was also, for many years, the religion editor for Publishers Weekly. And in that role, she told us she received a lot of correspondence in response to her various books and articles. Some of it was very positive, and some of it was not so positive. But she said the ones that scared her the most always began, "Dear Ms. Tickle, I am a Christian." Yeah. Because invariably, she said, the mail that began by saying, "I am a Christian," usually ended up strongly disagreeing with something she had said, and doing so in very mean and hateful and even sometimes threatening ways. She concluded by saying, apparently it's true that no one can hate like a Christian. How sad is that, really? But sometimes I agree with her. You know, I can remember right after the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, there were so-called Christians who went around saying that the horror of 9/11 was simply God's way of lashing out at the United States for being such a depraved society, because we were steeped in sin. So I guess Phyllis was right. No one can hate like a Christian. How sad and tragic, but also how mistaken and how very, very wrong they are. And if you need a scripture on that, and you usually do need a scripture to stand against those who try to hide their hate behind scriptures, I would go with today's gospel reading. I would actually go with the whole Bible, because I know that taken in its entirety, the Bible can more easily be understood as one big long love letter from God. That's why those who often misuse it will usually pick and choose one or two verses to make their chosen point, and then completely ignore the rest of what it has to say. Today's gospel reading does speak exactly to this question of whether God somehow gets even with people for some perceived sin or evil that they've committed by causing bad things to happen to them in return. So Jesus is teaching the crowds when people ask him about two separate tragic events. One was apparently the horrendous torture and murder of some Galilean Jews who were executed by the Roman governor Pontius Pilate. And to add insult to injury, Pilate had their blood mixed with the blood of the Romans' animal ritual sacrifices, in an outrageous act of blasphemy and desecration that was meant to terrorize the living and to bring scandal to the dead. Those who were killed were most likely religious extremists and very pious Jews. The actions of Pilate would have had the chilling double effect of striking terror into the hearts of the Jewish people and trashing their dearly held religious beliefs, all at the same time. The other incident that Jesus referred to involved a tall structure, the Tower of Siloam, which had inexplicably come crashing down, and it killed 18 people. So the implication behind the questioning of these events is that somehow the people who were affected by them must surely have done something to make God angry. Angry enough to do something terrible to them in return. After all, they couldn't possibly be innocent. They must surely have done something to cause the wrath of God to come against them like that. But Jesus very clearly says, no, that's not true. That's not the case. He said, do you think that because these Galileans suffered in this way, they were worse sinners than all other Galileans? No, I tell you. Then he goes on to say, or those 18 who were killed when the Tower of Siloam fell on them, do you think that they were worse offenders than all the others who were living in Jerusalem? No, I tell you, Jesus says. And then he used the occasion to teach them further and explain that at some point they too will die. So they'd best see about their relationships with God before that happens. But Jesus says no, clearly no. That is not the way it works. There's another place in the scriptures where Jesus is asked about the blind man, right? Who sinned, this man or his parents? Somebody did something wrong because this man is blind. And he said, no, nobody sinned. Neither this man nor his parents. So Jesus was always correcting this misperception about God. But then there's St. Paul. In the second reading today, Paul is talking about the people of ancient Israel being struck down in the wilderness because, Paul says, God was not pleased with most of them. Now, a careful reading of that text reveals that Paul doesn't say that God struck them down, but that they were destroyed by the destroyer, which is death. Death is the destroyer. So think about that as you wish. Clearly, though, St. Paul seems to think that somehow these folks got what they deserved. It's a very human way to think about things. The Bible, especially the Old Testament, is filled with stories of God wreaking havoc on people and on nations and situations in order to get even for some perceived infraction. It's God, the divine state trooper, just waiting for people to mess up. And it's easy to look at some terrible situation, especially if we're in the middle of it ourselves, and to wonder what we did to deserve it, right? What did I do to deserve this? We say that all the time. Even some of us who have good theology and a healthy image of God, we sometimes go there when things get really awful and really hard. What did I do to deserve this? But Jesus is very, very clear in saying that we didn't do anything wrong. Very clearly he says it. Sometimes, oftentimes, bad things do happen to good people. None of us is any better or worse off than the rest of us. We don't make bad things happen, and neither does God. They're simply the result of us being broken people living in a broken world and living the consequences of our freedom. It's simply the result of our freedom to choose. We're all made in the image and likeness of God, and God is free, and so are we. We're free because real love cannot happen without real freedom. God is love and God is free, and we are made in the image and likeness of God. God chooses to love us, and we are free to choose to love God in return or not. Real love can't happen without real freedom. Relationship with God is not a shotgun wedding. It's not. God is so free that God's freedom is even expressed in the divine name that God revealed to Moses from the burning bush in today's first reading. I am who I am, God said. Some translations have, I am who am, or I am who I will be, or just simply, I am. Scholars call that name, which is very problematic to translate, the Tetragrammaton. It basically is an expression of being. God says, my name is I am. So scholars call it the Tetragrammaton. I call it yet another indication of the supreme sovereign majesty of God, the one who is, the mystery who creates and loves the entire universe. It's the expression of God as the source of all being. And it's the expression of God as the source of all freedom. Real love cannot happen without real freedom. It's been said many times that God created us in God's image, and we immediately return the favor. And to a great extent, we choose how we see God, though admittedly, much of our choosing is probably, for the most part, subconscious. But we all do choose how we see God. And I guess that's exactly how we end up with so many different versions of the same God. So, who is God for you? For you. Is God the divine state trooper, just waiting for you to mess up so God can do something bad to get even with you? Probably way worse than writing a ticket, too. Or is God the God who was revealed by Jesus Christ, the God who is with us no matter what, through all the joy and pain and triumph and tragedy that are the consequences of our freedom, the freedom that we've been given as the dearly loved children of God? It's our choice. We really do make God in our own image. We really can know God as we choose to know God, for better or for worse. Personally, I can't imagine why anyone would choose to know God as the divine state trooper. I can't imagine why anyone would choose to know a God of petty retribution and unbridled anger, even if it might sometimes seem to qualify as righteous indignation. I'm afraid I just don't understand. I don't get that. Personally, I would much rather know and love the God who is revealed in and by Jesus Christ. We can choose the way we see and know God, but in truth, our choices cannot change the ultimate reality of who God is. God is the sovereign majesty, the one who is, the source of all being, the mystery who creates and loves the universe, the one who said, I am who am. Real love cannot happen without real freedom. God is perfectly free to be as God chooses to be. And according to Jesus Christ, God chooses to be love. Only love.